What's up, guys, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Robbie Cassidy, and today we want to discuss, or I'm going to discuss, a time as well as a book that changed my perspective, and it changed my perspective on a lot of different things. And in this podcast, I want to talk about, I'll probably break this into two parts, realistically, because I want to talk a small bit about how it developed originally, who introduced me to the book, and then as well as what I took from the book, because in fairness, it's a pretty in-depth book in that it's a 16-hour audiobook, if that says anything about it. But it does cover a lot of different topics, but it kind of along the same line, and it's really about behavior. When I look at it, or when I think of it on an overall sense, behavior is probably one of the best ways to describe the book. So to jump into it, before I went into physio, and I did my master's, for anyone who doesn't know, I did my master's in University of Limerick, and it was a professional diploma, or not a professional diploma, it was they called it a professional degree, in that once you come out, it's an accelerated master's, so you do your 2 years, and you come out as a fully qualified physio. But basically it's like you have your semesters over the summer and everything, you don't get that much time off. But before I went in there, I had to basically complete this exam, and it's the Gamsat exam. Now, for anyone who knows the Gamsat exam, I'm sure if you've done it, you have nightmares about it. It's the graduate entry medical assessment test, or something along those lines. But they use it for medical school, for people who are trying to get into medical school. For some reason, UL decided to use it as their selection process to get into the physio degree, because it was a new course, and they only had maybe, I think, 1 year before us who had gone in and gone through it. So basically, in the exam that you have to sit, it has a couple of different sections on it. Now, I'll talk about why I want to talk about, I'll explain why I'm talking about this exam and that. And I guess this podcast is more about a time that changed my perspective, as opposed to the book specifically, because there was a lot of other things that contributed to it as well. But it was through studying for the Gamsat that I got introduced to the book. And just to give you a better idea of what the exam itself was, it's a 5.5 hour exam split into two parts. You're basically, the way they've created is you're unable to finish it. So you don't have enough time to get through the whole exam. So it's all about reasoning, it's all about logical thinking, and it's all about, I guess, communication and how you can get your point across, as well as how you can decipher what the certain meanings are, what certain opinions are, how you can figure out, to be honest, when I think back on it, PTSD after doing it, but you have to go into, it talks about, you have organic chemistry, you have biology, you have physics. It goes into a lot of detail on that. As well as that, you also have, let's say in section 1, it's called reasoning in humanities and social sciences. So there's a certain aspect of that. You look at cartoons, looks at spatial awareness, problem solving, extracts from different books, different novels, and then you have to give your understanding on it. And what I'll do is I'll read out a couple of different examples, just so you're not in the dark completely. But it also goes into poetry. It'll give you a certain subject, and then it'll ask you for your opinion on it. And the subjects aren't like relevant at times. They could be from the 1700s or 1600s. And I'm just looking at one here. One of the most random questions on it was like, you were looking at how to tie a knot. And one of the questions after it, you obviously had the diagrams. You had 4 or 5 different diagrams on how to tie a knot. But then what they would do is they'd basically explain, it's an excellent method. They take the method from like the 1800s, and they'd say it's an excellent method for using a loop, a heavy monofilament leaders for attaching lures. And then the questions after would be about specific things. So is it more important to look at the fixed loop knot in preference to any other kind of knot? Then it'd say, in reference to diagram 4, what do the different parts that are labelled respectively represent? And is that like an overhand, a grinner, a leader, mainline? So to be honest, when I was going into it, I didn't think that I would have, when I was going into the exam, or when I was going into physio, I didn't think I'd have to learn about too much about fishing. But for some reason, they decided throw this into the exam itself. And I think what it is it kind of looks at your emotional intelligence, as well as like, are you able to take information from different subjects, put them together and formulate an opinion on them in a lot of situations. So they're looking at another one here. It'd be like, consider following the advice from rulers given by a 15th century writer. They might talk about a ruler should have a flexible disposition. He should not deviate from what is good, if that's possible, but he should know how to do evil if that is necessary. And then at the end, your question, it'll give you a couple of different, in that specific one, there's 5 different statements. And at the end, the questions are, the advice offered by the writer is moral, utopian, humane, pragmatic. The writer suggests that citizens and subjects are conservative and compliant, indifferent and apathetic, gullible and unreliable, or loyal and law-abiding. So it does really stretch your I guess your how you think about things, what your values are, what your principles are. It makes you really think about that, and then you have to kind of put yourself into other people's situations. And I think that's where it looks to incorporate more emotional intelligence, and it tries to figure out from another situation how was that person thinking and why were they thinking that way. And to be honest, it's an interesting one, especially because the exam was made specifically for medical students. I think it's an interesting one because when you're in a discipline or a profession that you're dealing with people, especially with there's life or death matters, it's really, really important if you're giving someone information and if they're making decisions that you have to understand what's going on in their mind. It's not just what you think, because in a lot of situations you may have a lot of the answers or a lot of the information to give, but are you able to give it in such a way that a person is able to formulate their own opinion? And I think that's a big thing with working with clients. And when I am working with clients, it's that sometimes you can get caught up in thinking that, okay, I know how to do this. I've done this before 100 times. You do this, and this. And people will be like, perfect. And I suppose an easy example could be like for like a knee pain or a back pain. You say, just do this, and this, and you're going to be good. But then without taking into account that all the other things that are going on in that person's life, how you phrase it to them, the state of mind they were in at the time, what happened to them just before they came in. Like if someone came in feeling rushed because they were nearly in a car accident on the way in, and they have a load of things to get done after, and they're just trying to fit in their physio, they're just trying to fit in a consultation, and they have a really short window to get it in, a lot of the time mentally they're not in the right place. So you have to try decipher what's the best thing to tell them, what's the best thing to give them, because you do need to see what somebody is like. I think you need to get a good understanding of what someone is like at the time when you talk to them. Because, yeah, as I said, if a few things happen, like they might just pick up the smallest things. And I see this often when I talk to clients or when I talk to people that I work with, that they'll say, oh, the physio just told me to rest it, elevate it, and make sure I don't feel any pain or discomfort at all. When the physio might have told them, do these exercises, and then after that you might have to rest it for a small while or elevate it. Or another big one that I hear is that the physio told me that I shouldn't bend my back, or I should always squat down to pick something up. And that they might have just picked up little snippets of what that physio had said to them. So I think in a lot of cases it's really important to repeat back what you say to somebody. And I often do it with my own clients. If there's something that I think, I'll say, do you understand, or does that make sense? And if they're kind of iffy about it, I'll get them to repeat back what they think I said to them, and then we clarify different things. And it's really important to do that, especially when you stop looking at the body mechanically, because if somebody's in that mechanical mindset, they can get stuck in, okay, right, my foot is giving problems, and that's causing I have a flat foot, and that's causing my knee to give problems, and that's causing my hip and my back. When in nearly every situation, that's not the cause. That's not the root cause of the problem. There's a lot of other issues going on, and generally just because you have flat feet, it's not because you have back pain. So, but that's another podcast in itself. So basically, the reason I'm saying this is that this exam or this test was used to test your emotional intelligence, how you were able to, how you were able to communicate with people, and how you could understand their opinion and point of view. So it did, when it comes down to tying a knot, it's not specifically, you're not looking at just the diagram. You don't have to take the diagram as is about tying a knot. You more have to take what the writer was trying to get across, or the points that he was trying to make, and that's how you're answering your questions. So that's where it comes into it. It's a really interesting exam. I could recommend you look it up online. Look up the Gamsat practice test, and you can pick different questions from it and see what you think of them, and they usually have the answers below them. But if you weren't planning on going into a medical degree and you didn't have to do the exam, I would say steer clear, because it is a mind-numbing exam. And I want to talk through some of the other sections, and I guess what they were trying to take out of you, what they were trying to take from you, or what they were trying to get out of you when you were trying to answer them. And then with the whole exam, the reason I'm talking about this is because the book that I'm going to talk about as well, that helps you develop a better understanding, and it gives you a broader idea of just, I guess, relevant events in a way. It's a funny one. It's something that this podcast is coming out late, because when I did up all my notes for this podcast, I was like, I need to wait another couple of days here before I even think about recording this, because there's so much information packed into it, and I want to do it as much justice as I can, that if I was just to put it together and put out the podcast, I wouldn't know if I'd be able to do it to the same degree or same quality as if I basically slept on it. I'm a big believer in if you like sleeping on something, you get a way better understanding of it. And you'll often see that if you get into a fight with someone, you go to bed, you wake up the next day, and you nearly have a better understanding of their side of it in a lot of cases, unless you're very what's the word? I don't want to say ignorant, but if you're very you don't change your mind too often, and a lot of times you'll have solidified your own case more so than looking at their case, which is probably something you need to work on yourself. But yeah, so the section 1 was about reasoning in humanities and social sciences. Section 2 was on written communication, and this is the part when I was doing this exam. Basically, I went to an intensive course, and the course was a Saturday Sunday. I don't know if they did a Friday evening, but I think it was a Saturday Sunday course, all day, and you just go in. They basically run you through as many examples as you can in as many situations as they can in that time, and then you're supposed to go away and you're supposed to study it and kind of formulate your own ideas. And we had a really, really good English teacher, literature professor. He was from Oxford anyway. He was very, very good, and he took over the written communication part of it. And to just look at the written communication part, it was like, consider the following comments and develop a piece of writing in response to one or more of them. Your writing will be judged on the quality of what you have to say in response to the theme, how well you organize and present your point of view, and how effectively you express yourself. And then the last line is, you will not be judged on the views or attitudes you express. Well, I would take that lightly. I'm sure that there was definitely some very liberal people in there who would maybe not agree too much with some of the things that you may say, or people who are very conservative and might not, have their own opinions. It's very hard to remove your opinion from when you're looking at these things. So when I was looking at the statements here, the first one is that the belief that youth is the happiest time of life is founded on a fallacy. The happiest person is the person who thinks the most interesting thoughts, and we grow happier as we grow older. William Lyon Phelps. The next one then is, when I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years. So Mark Twain. The next one was, the young suffer less from their own errors than the young suffer less from their own errors than from the cautiousness of the old. And it's better to, I can't even say that name, Yargi. The next one is, it's better to waste one's youth than to do nothing with it at all. So basically, you have to pick one of these. You have to, or not pick one of them, you have to read all of them, and then you have to come up with a response that intertwines all of them, that I guess has a common theme running throughout it, and that you're able to tie in each of these. Now, you don't have to tie all of them in, but at the same time, you can pick a couple of them. You can say, well, this one's compared to this one is compared to this one, and this is the point that they're trying to get across. And then you're looking at the argument, very like your leaving cert. Is this right? Is it wrong? As in, like, is there certain elements of that this are right in certain situations for certain people? And then the other one, it's like, is there other aspects of it that aren't right, and that in today's age aren't as suitable as they were, or as it was back in the day, because a lot of these are old quotes, obviously. And then section 3 was based on reasoning in biological and physical sciences. Now, biology was a strong subject of mine in school, and I had done my undergraduate in athletic rehabilitation therapy, so I had doubled down on that. Chemistry, though, I had never done it before. I had done it up to maybe third year in school, and then I didn't do it after that. So I can tell you I hated it. Organic chemistry especially, my God, when I was learning organic chemistry, and I had 6 weeks to learn it, and it's basically, the way they do it is that it's a first year. You have to learn everything. I think it's for first and second year, or just first year of college. So you're basically taking in a college degree in 6 weeks. That's kind of the way it looks at it. And then physics was the last one, and I can't say that I had done much physics either. So going into it, I wasn't that prepared, if I'm honest. But in fairness, it worked out all right, and I came out the right end of it. So it could have been worse. But how it prepared me, this is I suppose where I'm looking to go with the podcast. The exam itself gave me a new way of reasoning. I feel it made me consider different perspectives, and made me consider different opinions, as well as why they were that way. It wasn't that anyone was right or wrong. It was that in their mind, why did they feel they're right? In someone else's mind, why did they feel they're wrong? Why would that person be opposed to this person doing something? Okay, it really changed my perspective on that. And I think that was a huge part of the exam. The other thing was that, as I was saying, it's a 5.5 hour exam. So when you're doing the exam, you don't have time to finish it. So you have to pick sections that you feel you're strongest at. But obviously you're not going to be strong at every section or a lot of them. So you have to also try to kind of come up with an idea of, well, I hate organic chemistry, but there was a certain level of points for each question, and I could give this a go, and I could give it this much time, and basically try to come out with an answer that was right or wrong. And a lot of it was multiple choice, which was good. So with multiple choice questions, obviously, I don't want to be wrong in saying this, but I think that the questions, some of the answers of the questions were marked differently. Like one would be 4 points, second would be 2 or 3, 2 and 1. I could be wrong in saying that, but I think for the written communication part, and I think for the reasoning in humanities and social sciences, I feel that was a part of it, that they were ranked differently. But it was a good few years ago since I've done it, so maybe I'm wrong in saying that as well. But it's very interesting exam. Changed my perspective on a lot of things, and really made me think about other people's perspectives, about why one person would think that way, why another person would act another way. Okay, and the other side of it is actually reran over the sciences. So my biology was obviously improved, and anatomy and all that. I was introduced to organic chemistry, which I will never go back to again. And physics, I enjoyed the physics side of things. I thought that was an interesting side of it, and it did help me with biomechanics as well. And I had done biomechanics as well, so I suppose it did play into it a small bit more. Other than that, I really loved the written communication side of it. I loved that side of it, of looking at different opinions, looking at why people were the way they were, why they acted certain ways. That was a big thing for me, because I enjoyed English for my leaving cert. It was one of my best subjects, and it was something that I felt you couldn't be wrong in it. Once you were able to make a good enough argument, you couldn't really be wrong. You could lay out what your opinion was, and the teacher would have to take your opinion, which in my situation, I was happy over that. But looking at then after I guess the point where I signed up to the course, I jumped into the intensive course. The organic chemistry in that was learn it, sit down, learn it. Same with the biology, get a good understanding of it. And it was nearly like just pack it in and hopefully then that you'll remember it when the exam rolls around. For the other side of it, the written communication and the reasoning and the problem solving and the poetry and all that was more you had to change your perspective, and you had to be empathetic towards other perspectives and why they were that way. And for me, before I guess going into it, that was a huge thing, because it was something that, although you do think about it, it was something that when I was made aware of it and I had to really, really study it, or really think about it in a lot more detail and think about the wackiest and wildest ways of doing it, because really one of the professors, he was just saying, I want you to give random reasons, like what's an out of the box one. So like obviously you have your standard reasons of why someone would think that way and the way that the society was at the time and all that, but then you have to think about, well, what's this person's individual motivation? Okay, what's the collective motivation for a certain answer to come across a certain way? And that was, for me then, was like, I loved that side of it. And the guy from Oxford, now I wish I could remember his name because it's worse that I can't, but he was very, very good. And he basically said to us at the end of or maybe midway through the course that we were there, so you basically have him for 2 days and it's intensive and that's it. And he was obviously an excellent English teacher, an excellent communications teacher, or professor. I think he was a professor actually. But he said, like someone asked him, is there anything that we can read or anything that we can do or anything that we can do that will help speed this process up? Because everyone was there. It was intensive. They were trying to speed the whole thing up so they could learn what they had to learn, and that they wouldn't be beaten around the bush. And he suggested that, he said, if there's one thing I could give you to take away, apart from all the little documents that he had about reading and getting an understanding of those, he said, I want you to read the book The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. So that is the end to part 1, guys and girls. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to put part 2 out later on this week, and I'm going to go into a lot more detail on the book The Selfish Gene, as well as how it changed my perspective and how it changed basically on my perspective on health, on behaviour, and yeah, I'll tie it into the Gamsat as well, and I'll tie it into how it helped me answer some of the questions for anyone who is thinking about going further, or who just would be interested in checking and seeing how you would formulate an answer for an exam like that, or for anyone who wants to see me struggle, because I just do it on the fly. I don't have an answer prepared. I just basically read out apart from the exam, and I just do it on the fly on the podcast. So that's going to be out later on this week. To make sure that you get it, I would love if you could subscribe to the podcast so follow it on Spotify or subscribe on iTunes or YouTube, and I will let you know, or you'll be alerted straight away when it comes out. You can actually also set alerts on Spotify now. It's something that I started doing for podcasts, and it's great. You just get a notification when a new podcast comes out. So I would definitely recommend doing that as well. And lastly, if you have been enjoying the podcast, I would love if you could rate it, because it goes a long way in promoting the podcast to new listeners, and it really helps me get it out there. It improves my reach, and then I can get on better guests all the time. So coming back, I'll be able to quiz people on these things, and it won't just be me you're listening to, it'll be other people who are experts in their field. So yeah, guys, that's all from me today. Hope everyone is doing well, and looking forward to putting out that other episode later on this week. Chat to you all again soon, and have a good one.